Welcome to Story Addict, your fix of the best new books, TV and film, with your host Rebecca Boyer, voracious reader, compulsive writer and tired parent.
Hello, this is Rebecca Boyer, your host and card-carrying story addict. This week I have 2 new releases for you, plus one of my all-time favourite speculative fiction novels, The Time Traveller's Wife. But first, dear listener, we need to talk about something which has been hotly debated in the media recently, how the youth of today aren't reading properly. They are, drum roll, skim reading. In all seriousness, it is a problem if our kids can't digest information in detail and consider it deeply. You can read the full article by Mary Ann Wolfe in The Guardian. I'll include the link in the show notes. It's called Skim Reading is the New Normal. The Effect on Society is Profound. So the neuroscience is rather alarming. She talks about brain development which isn't happening and negatively affects critical analysis and empathy. However, my initial reaction to this was that there was a large part of me that read the article and just couldn't stop laughing about how times have changed. When I studied history in Year 12 and then continued it for 4 years at uni, including writing a thesis, we were specifically taught skim reading skills. The reason? There was so much information out there that we had to learn how to scan it, critically analyse it, and distill the information into a few thousand words of intelligent discourse. Fast forward 20 years and people are freaking out because kids have learned this skill early. But they learned them for the same reason. There's so much information out there that the skills they need are different. Kids are skim reading and not learning deeply from texts. I'm going to play devil's advocate and ask, do we really care? Does it just mean we need to move away from text and move to storytelling and teaching in different formats like visual and audio, which we're already doing anyway? Tell me your thoughts, Story Addicts. Leave a comment or let me know on Twitter or Facebook. But now on to books. First up this week, I have a freshly released historical fiction for you, All Among the Barley by Melissa Harrison. It's set in 1930s rural England. It's a slow-moving book. It's got gorgeous writing and a strong sense of place. It's just really lovely to read. And it's so well written you almost don't care what it's about. What I eventually realised is that it is in fact 2 stories in parallel. The main story that Edie records in first person of her life on the land, and the story that Constance, an outsider, is writing about what she perceives life on the land to be about. In the same way, the stories are sometimes hard to identify. The story in this book takes a long time to find as well, though the beautiful writing makes it a very pleasant wait. So I thought I'd give you an example of the writing. In October, Wych Farm's trees turned quickly and all at once, blazing into oranges and reds and burnished golds. With little wind to strip them, the woods and spinneys lay on our land like treasure. The massy hedgerows filigreed with old man's beard and enamelled with rose hips and black sloes. Along the winding course of the River Stound, the older cars were studded with earth stars and chanterelles, and dense with the rich autumnal stink of rot. But crossing Longpiece towards the Lottons, the sky opened into austere, equinoctial blue, where flocks of peewits wheeled and turned, flashing their broad wings black and white. So Edie is a 14-year-old bookworm with an overactive imagination who prefers her own company. This is one of my favourite quotes about Edie. So she speaks in the first person, so this is her talking. I read The Midnight Folk and spent my days pretending to be Kay Harker and embarking on imaginary adventures involving knights, smugglers and highwaymen, Rollicum Lightfoot the fox, and a coven of witches so terrifying I eventually wrapped the book in a feed sack and buried it under the dung heap in case they should burst from its pages and carry me away, so consuming had my enthusiasm become. So Edie lives on Wych Farm with her family, mother, father, a couple of farmhands, her grandfather and her older brother. Her sister lives in town with her new baby and her husband. Edie's finished school at the age of 14, because that's what you do in those days. And people are trying to push her into either finding a husband or finding a job, mostly looking after other people's children. Unfortunately, she doesn't really like children. Then Constance swans into town. So Constance is from the big city. She's a lot older than Edie. So she's from London. She wears men's clothes. This is the 1930s, remember? And goes around charming the villagers and farming families so she can learn all she possibly can about quaint country life. It's all for her magazine series. She wants to preserve the traditions of English, the pastoral ideal. For Edie, she's a breath of fresh air. Constance fixates on Edie, and Edie feels like this new friend really sees her. So here's another quote from Edie. I smiled back and realised that I was glad to see her. I felt as though she perceived me more clearly than my family did, for they all took me for granted, whereas she seemed curious about who I was and what I thought. Although I did not know her well yet, I felt more real, more interesting even, when I saw myself through Constance's eyes. I loved the character of Constance. She was so familiar you feel like you could meet her on the street today and she'd be saying the same things. For the 1930s, Connie has some rather radical ideas about politics, which had me yelling out, "Oh my, it's Brexit, but 80 years ago." So Constance says, and imagine this said by someone from the pro-Brexit camp today, "We need a strong government to free us from our dependence on the international finance system, one which will act in the best interests of the British people, that will favour British manufacturing and farming, and ensure this never happens again. We need a British system of credit that benefits Britain alone, rather than lining the pockets of usurers and profiteers." So this nationalist sentiment has most of the farmers eating out of Constance's hands. So her suffragette views, however, are less welcome in the house by Edie's father, who is quite affronted by the idea that women are now permitted to vote. So this is after women have gotten the vote. He gives the decree that if Edie's mother, so if, she doesn't have to vote, if Edie's mother votes in the next election, she will only vote for whom he tells her to vote for. So he can't do anything about the fact that she's got the vote, but she will still do what he tells her to and vote what he tells her to vote for. Yet for all her apparent excitement over equality, Constance is quintessentially not of the working classes. So as Edie's mother retorts out of her earshot, "I'll wager she won't be writing an article for her magazine about how we do the washing. She was agog when your grandfather told her how to use a scythe. I don't see why that should be any more interesting than women's work." So women's work to Constance is less interesting. Even though she's a woman, she still finds it less interesting because it's not something that she would do. It's not something that she would want to do. So soon after that, Constance's first magazine article comes out, and it demonstrates her complete blindness to the reality and poverty of peasant life, even while she's been living amongst it for a month or two. In the article, she says, "They may sweat and they may toil, but there is a purity of purpose to their labours, for it is not enrichment they seek, nor government assistance, but the simple perpetuation of their own kind." And I felt this was really relevant to some of the conversations you may have heard going on today about writing outside of your lived experience. There's been a fair bit of uproar about people, writers in particular, trying to adopt experiences from people and cultures that they know nothing about and use them in their stories. So I think this is the perfect illustration of pitfalls of writing outside your lived experience. You think you get it, but you just don't. So Constance has been watching these people work. She's been watching them struggle, and yet all she sees is the rural ideal. I also loved the blithe references to bigotry, which mirror those we still hear today, albeit aimed at different minorities. So remembering this is the 1930s, just before the Jewish Holocaust, this passage is particularly haunting. "They're Jews, Edie, and we don't need any more of them in Elmbourne. The egg merchant Blum and his wife are bad enough." I hadn't realised. I had assumed they were just people. I could be so terribly naive sometimes. "Oh, but why don't you like them?" "Well, I'm no anti-Semite, of course, but they're not from here, and if we're not careful, they'll mar the character of England forever, not to mention the way they undercut wages and take work away from ordinary people, just as the Irish did." So this was really reminiscent to me of, I'm not a racist, but... So All Among the Barley is an incredible book with so much to say about tolerance, equality and empathy. Be warned, if you're looking for something fast-paced, this is not the book for you. It's very slow burn, but I still found myself not being able to put the book down. So reading it was like watching a beautiful slow running creek just bubble along. It's out now from Bloomsbury Publishing. I'll pop the link in the show notes at storyaddict.com.au. And now for something with a completely different pace, I want to tell you about the new book just out from the fabulous Holly Wainwright of Mamma Mia fame, How to Be Perfect. So this is the perfect book for you if you want something light, familiar and fun. It's contemporary fiction set in Australia, and it follows the lives of two bloggers and a brand new mum. If you've read Holly's first novel, The Mummy Bloggers, you'll recognise a few of the main characters in How to Be Perfect. So Abby Black is back with her blog on living the green life, bigger and more lucrative than ever thanks to the publicity from that awards night debacle, which saw her rival shot down in flames. And thanks to the new marriage equality laws, she's planning her wedding to her longtime same-sex partner. Also, her ex-husband is living in her barn. He's licking his emotional wounds while Abby raises his two kids from his second marriage. Needless to say, the whole situation is causing more than a little friction in the family. Elle has abandoned her luxurious Brighton home and found herself a whole new stratosphere of wealth thanks to her Byron Bay benefactor. So she's gone up north. From his tropical oasis, she runs her new blog, telling a small but worshipful following how to live their lives as their best selves. She's also selling ridiculously priced supplements, diet and exercise regimes. And then you've got Frances. Frances isn't a blogger. She's a nurse on maternity leave with her first baby. And motherhood isn't shaping up to be quite what she expected. She's got a crying newborn, financial woes, a shift worker husband who's never around, and a desperate need to live up to the shining best self that Elle promises she can be. She's also determined to make it to one of Elle's exclusive wellness retreats, even though she can't afford it. How to Be Perfect is a rollicking good read that doesn't take itself too seriously. It is, however, packed with perceptive insights into parenting, hilarious observations on modern life, and more than a few heart-in-mouth moments. And that's out now from Eleanor Unwin. And if that's not enough to add to your to-be-read pile, next up it's that time in the show. We're speculating on speculative fiction. So every episode in Season 1 of Story Addict, I'll be bringing you one of my favourite spec-fic books. It's a genre where anything can happen and frequently does. The Time Traveller's Wife. Oh my. So written by Audrey Niffenegger, if I've pronounced that correctly. Published in 2003, this is a love story that centres around the concept of time travel as an uncontrollable genetic disorder. This book is so intense. I absolutely loved it. I've read it twice, which for me is a lot. I rarely reread books. So Claire and Henry met when Claire was 6 and Henry was 36. And they were married when Claire was 22 and Henry was 30. So I'll let that sink in for a minute. When 36-year-old Henry meets 6-year-old Claire, he's already been married to her for 6 years. So Henry's genetic disorder means that he has no control over his time travel and he will get pulled out of time at the most inopportune of moments, but he gets sent back in time to places where he has a real emotional pull. So he often visits Claire when she's a child. So Claire knows him quite well by the time he meets her for the first time. You would think that it would get really confusing, but somehow the book manages to never really be confusing. It is absolutely heartbreaking and very, very intense. I already said that, didn't I? But it is very intense, but also breathtaking and heartbreaking, and you should read it. It's incredible. A quick tip though, the movie is by comparison awful. My advice would be to skip the movie altogether and just read the book. So finally, what am I reading right now? I'm reading 3 books, of course. A rather strange time-warping murder mystery. The second one is a book about an impossible dinner party. And then Alan and Unwin have kindly sent me Clementine Ford's new book, Boys Will Be Boys, which has just been optioned for screen, by the way. So naturally I started reading that too. Anyway, that's it from me this week. Happy storying, and I'll see you next time.
Thanks for tuning in to Story Addict. Remember to subscribe on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen to podcasts. Connect with like-minded story addicts at storyaddict.com.au.